throughout Cayuga County. So we're trying to be respectful of everybody's time because there's a lot of folks that are involved with all of those agencies. So rather than duplicate this across the entire county, we decided to work together on this and try to make this happen. Most of us know each other a little bit. Some of us don't. My name is Jeff Dygert. I'm the city manager for the city of Auburn. And for this group, I'm going to act as one of the co-facilitators of the discussion. The other individual helping with this is Steve Lynch from Cayuga County Office of Planning and Economic Development. I think in probably about 30 years of service, Steve's facilitated many more discussions on a variety of topics than pretty much anybody on here. So I'll be looking to Steve for some of his insight. Steve and I will be taking notes throughout this, not necessarily interjecting our opinions, but trying to guide the discussion, keep it moving. We have approximately 2 hours to get through some of these discussions. So we may have to ask that we move a discussion along. We certainly aren't trying to be rude, but we want to make sure that all of the participants get a chance to express what's on their mind, and there'll be follow-up meetings. So at this point, I'd like to roll it over to Steve. If you got any thoughts, Steve, before we get going?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be with you today. I hope that you have at least taken a look at the policies that were distributed from the Sheriff's Department and the Auburn Police Department. A lot of work has been done on those, and some of them relate directly to the items that we're going to discuss today, and some are tangential to the items we'll discuss today. Looking forward to the conversation and ready to roll. Jeff?
Okay, and again, a couple of things. I'll do a roll call here in a minute and just make sure we're all good technology-wise so that we can have this conversation. I also want to mention before we get deep into the discussion that there's a couple of things that are also going on along the way. This group is focused on alternatives to police response and procedural justice, but I think it's important to note for those that might not be aware of it, that at the same time and unrelated to this project, Cayuga County is working on an alternatives to incarceration project that they have going on. So that is something else that's happening that fits in with this discussion to a certain extent, or works side by side with it. We've got some updated New York State initiatives related to discovery laws and process, which I'm sure will come up in the conversation here today. And by all accounts, we're lucky to have a police department and sheriff's office that have been very proactive over the last few years, and especially the last few months. Prior to this executive order 203 from New York State government, they were doing a lot of work to improve community relations and to update their accreditation and things like that. And I know that it looks like, where did we go here? I thought we had Sheriff Skank on the line here. There you go. Would you want to say a few words, Sheriff?
Sure. I'm going to try to bounce into all three groups for a little period of time today, but thank you everybody for coming together. And I'd just like to stress that don't let my presence or anybody from the Sheriff's Office or PD keep you from expressing your real concerns. We want honest feedback, even if maybe it's something that might not be easy for us to hear. So I would encourage you to please, speak and tell us exactly what's on your mind if you have any concerns. But thank you everybody for being here. And I'm not sure how long I'll stay, but I am going to try to hit the other meetings too. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Again, just so everybody's aware, our police and law enforcement representatives that are on this call, on this meeting, are here to answer questions, provide some clarification, interpret some of the discussion that goes on so that they can take it back to their agencies and have further discussion about it there. right now, I'd like to just go through and give everybody a really quick opportunity. I know a lot of you are very well known in the community, but there may be some folks on this meeting that aren't aware of your background. And again, respectfully to everyone, if we can kind of keep that down to a brief introduction so we can get on to the meat of this meeting, that would be fantastic. So I'm just going to go down a list of attendees that I've got on here, and I see Rhoda there. Hi, Rhoda. You want to introduce? You're on mute, Rhoda. There you go.
Yes, there I am. I'm off. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rhoda Overstreet Wilson, and I am the board president of Booker T. Washington Community Center and the vice president of the Auburn Cayuga chapter of the NAACP, in addition to sitting on the school, our school board. I'm passionate about this work, so I'm glad to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhoda. I know you've been part of a lot of the ongoing discussions, so thank you for that. Heather Petras.
Good afternoon. My name is Heather Petras, and I'm the Executive Director at Cayuga Counseling Services. I have been in the field for 20 years. I moved back, born and raised in Auburn, went to South Florida, Miami for undergrad, graduate school, have a master's degree in psychology, came back, and I've worked here at Cayuga Counseling Services all 20 years. So I started off as a therapist, and I've been the executive director now for about 10 years. And I have many community collaboratives with law enforcement. So thank you for having me be part of this.
Thanks, Heather. We've got John Sosi on the list, and I haven't heard from John. I don't know if he's potentially called in and doesn't show up on the list or not.
I haven't seen him here yet.
Okay. Lloyd Hoskins.
Good afternoon. I know most of the folks here. A couple I may not know, but I'm Lloyd Hoskins. I've been with the county for 38, 39 years now as its Youth Bureau Executive Director and also as the assigned council administrator. So I guess I come to this meeting kind of with a dual role in that I work with many of the attorneys on the assigned counsel panel. For those defendants that can't afford counsel, my office will assign legal counsel in criminal as well as family court cases. In my role as Youth Bureau Director, we get not as much as we used to, but we get grant money from office or OCFS, and we're able to distribute that money to not-for-profit agencies for youth development delinquency prevention. So currently this year, we're looking at Cayuga Counseling and Booker T. Washington Center, the YMCA, CHAD, and a few other agencies to fund youth development delinquency prevention programs. In addition to that, I'm also the coordinator for the countywide Stop DWI program. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to working with the group.
Picked up a few tasks along those 30-some years, apparently, huh?
Yes, just a few.
Captain Detective Kyle Platt. What's the proper order, Captain? Is it Detective Captain or Captain Detective?
Actually, it's Captain of Detectives.
Okay. All right.
When you get to Fred, it's a little different.
Okay.
My name's Kyle Platt. I've actually been with the Auburn Police Department going on 23 years, held position from patrol officer, detective, sergeant, lieutenant, worked the road, and now in charge of the detective bureau as a captain. So I've definitely been around the blocks a little bit. Hopefully I can give you guys some insight about our agency.
Great, thank you. And Captain Platt's the one that's been sending out emails and setting up these meetings. So if you require information or more specifics about Auburn Police Department, Captain Platt is our conduit there. All right, I'll try this again. Lieutenant of Detectives, Fred Cornelius from Sheriff's Department.
Man, so close. We got to be a little different. It goes the other way for us. Detective Cornelius, but Fred works for me. I've been with the sheriff's office for 25 years, a little over 25 years. 22 of those years have been in the Detective Bureau. So a long time doing that, performing those kind of functions. I've been a lieutenant for the last 2 years, kind of, guiding the criminal division, and along the way, I got a bachelor's degree in criminal justice administration, a master's degree in public administration. And I've been elected to the school board a couple of times, and I currently serve on the Owasco Town Council. And hopefully we can, work together to figure some of this stuff out.
Thank you. Counselor Jimmy Genentino.
Hey, Jeff. Good afternoon, everyone. As Jeff said, my name is Jimmy Genentino. I'm a member of Auburn City Council, finishing up the first year of my second term. I want to build a little bit upon what Jeff said about this process. As many of you know, Chief Butler and Sheriff Skank and their associated staffs have done a lot of work throughout the community here in the last 3 years, really building the foundation, I think, for this process. I think we're well ahead of the curve, and I'm looking forward to the continued conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole Stewart from the Sheriff's Department.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Stewart. I've been with the Sheriff's Office about 17 years now. I'm currently a detective, and I look forward to working with everyone.
Great. Thank you. Kathy Aguilar.
Hi, everyone. So I've been a teacher at Union Springs Middle School, high school for about 20 years. I taught for a couple years in the southwest side of Syracuse, taught for a Hillside Children's Center for a couple years. I have some strong connections to the Latino community here in Cayuga County, in particular, the migrant workers and the agricultural workers. And so I guess I've been invited to participate with this group and maybe give voice to some of their concerns. And I'm happy to be part of the group. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Greg Gilfus.
Hi, everybody. Greg Gilfus. I'm a sergeant with the city of Auburn. I've worked for the city for approximately 22 years. I kind of do dual roles. I'm also the officer in charge for the Village of Wheatsport Police Department. I've worked there over 14 years and 13 and a half of that as the officer in charge. So I kind of do a little bit of both. In my current role with the city is I'm the traffic coordinator for the city. And I look forward to answering any questions or helping out any way I can, and look forward to the process.
Okay, great, thank you. I see that John Sosi has called in. John, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. Can you see me?
I can see the picture that you posted.
Yeah, well.
But I don't see a video of you. Either way, as long as we've got you one way or another, that's good.
Let's see.
There you go.
There we go. All right, a little better. I apologize. I was late signing on because I'm on a job site, and it wouldn't let me into this meeting. It tried to make me wait till December 8th. But I'm on a job site right now, so I'm actually participating from my vehicle. My name is John Sosi. I'm a retired from New York State Electric and Gas, 35 years in electrical construction there, and I currently work for a company out of Rochester called Labella Associates, and we manage projects for the utility industry. But I believe the reason I was asked to be on this committee is my wife and I have, we've lived through some pretty traumatic events in our life, losing a daughter to domestic violence and losing a son to a drug overdose. And in the 9+ years since our daughter's death and the 7 years since our son's death, we spent a lot of time advocating for victims of domestic violence and those who suffer drug addiction. Worked with HEAL, one of the founding members of HEAL, and my wife has done a lot of work to raise money for local agencies to help support them in aiding those who suffer domestic violence. And and providing resources for them to help people in the community. So thank you for having me, and I'm actually honored to be a part of this.
Thanks, John. Glad you could make it. So thank you for everybody for, again, taking time out of your lives and sharing your expertise and your perspective on these different things so that we can move forward with this initiative and hopefully come out with a great product that does a community some good here. Steve Lynch, any other thoughts before we get moving on this stuff?
No other thoughts. It's just, I'm so glad that everyone's taken the time to be with us today, and looking forward to the conversation. And I guess what we will do is we'll sort of go to the review of the format for today, Jeff, if you would, and then we can move right on to alternatives to police response in the community.
Okay, great. So again, we've had some preliminary meetings to discuss some of these topics and the way we'd roll these things out. Again, we have an awful lot of law enforcement presence in the meeting. That is not, we don't want that to be construed as they're the focus of the meeting. And I say that with all due respect to our law enforcement folks that are on the line, but what we're really looking to do is get a community perspective on the different topics that are being rolled out here. Again, you are one of 3 subgroups. There's a variety of topics amongst 3 different groups that are meeting at this point in time. Some of those topics are repeated in 1 or 2 or 3 groups, but there's a particular focus for things. And again, this group is alternatives to police response and procedural justice. And the thought here is that we'll go through a list, and I sent that out earlier. I'm not sure if everybody got it for the agenda, but we've got some things by topic. We'll go down through there, see if you have any thoughts. We realize we've sent you an awful lot of information in the form of police policies. You may or may not have had time to get to all of those things, and that's fine. But if you have general thoughts on the topics, that's really what we're looking for right at this point, is, you know, your general thoughts about what's going on, share your experience with those things, and we'll go from there. Steve, you good?
I am good. Why don't we start with alternatives to police response? And on our agenda, one of the first items is proper response to non-criminal calls. And as a layperson, I would assume non-criminal calls, you know, are those of incident, accidents, emergency situations. If that is not a good clarification on non-criminal calls, maybe we can ask some of our law enforcement partners to sort of characterize what a non-criminal call is, and we can discuss the proper response to those calls.
I think that in this context, non-criminal calls would be things like mental health, drug-related calls, overdoses, those kind of things, or, you know, as far as, you know, what we're discussing here today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cornelius. That's great. Does anybody have any thoughts, initial thoughts on current response to non-criminal calls in the community?
I had one. Is there any type of accommodation if during a non-criminal call there's an idea that maybe any of the individuals involved don't speak English as their first language? Is there immediate access to a translator? Is it a live translator? Is it over the phone? Is it in English? Is it somebody who's speaking Spanish as a second language doing the translating, or is it a native Spanish speaker?
That really depends. I guess we've used a lot of different things. We've actually used, at least from our side of it, we'll sometimes have, we do have one officer that his actual native language is Spanish speaking. So English is his second language. So we do have one of those that's on, if he happens to be working, he's actually gone to some of those type of calls like that, Kathy. But we have used translator services. They've also tried to do some of the on-call things and also some of these Skype type of situations that are out there available. So there's definitely, I know the Sheriff's Department also has some personnel that actually could speak that as a second language. I think that we've used it time to time. I'll let Fred add some more to that, I'm sure.
So it's basically the same thing for us. We've used a number of different resources, whether it be a language line, that we can access through the 911 center, or oftentimes it's if we're dealing in the farm community, there's a person there that can help us with translation. We've used community members. We've used if it's a kind of a more serious criminal matter, then we would call for a certified interpreter that there's a list through the court system that we would use, but we use whatever resources that we have available to us at the time.
I have a quick question. I'm just wondering, how do calls get determined if they're non-criminal versus criminal? Is it determined by the person describing what they need help with, or is it determined by the person who's taking that information in?
I don't, I mean, I can answer that. I just didn't want to monopolize the conversation at all.
Fred.
Yeah, I know, it's hard to believe. The 911 center, one of the things that I think is important for people to know that a lot of times they don't know is when you dial 911 or you even call the Auburn Police Department phone number or the Sheriff's Department mainline phone number, it's not a member of our organization that answers the phone. It's a civilian dispatcher that's been very well trained to determine, what they're dealing with, and they're the ones that you're talking to, even though they may answer the phone Sheriff's Department or Auburn Police Department. It's a civilian dispatcher that takes all your initial information and then classifies that call into whatever it is, whether it's a mental health call, it's an assist a citizen call, or a burglary or whatever that may be, and then that's what's put out to the officers over the radio for them to respond.
So sometimes, depending on how a person is describing the help they need, that information could be misconstrued, because maybe, the person that's, asking for help, they're describing something completely different than what's actually going on.
Yes, that's correct. You've kind of hit that right on the head. Sometimes that happens. It may be limited information that the dispatcher has, or, maybe it's not all been relayed to them correctly, or just they're not hearing it, so it does happen a lot where we get there and we find out there's something totally different. So sometimes that line gets very blurred.
I imagine. Thank you.
Rhoda, that was actually a great question. And I put in my notes here for our next meeting to see if we could potentially get somebody from the 911 center involved to explain their process, because my background as well. And they do have a standardized set of procedures as well. So it may be helpful for them to be part of this discussion as well.
If I can follow up, maybe, Rhoda, that question, it does make a difference if they're arriving on the scene. And I guess part of the question might be, is there a change when the officers arrive at the scene and make their own assessment as to what is actually the situation?
Yeah. That's a good follow-up.
Okay.
So I think, maybe Greg might have some thoughts on that being more, right out on the front line of responding to these calls. Even though you're working traffic, I know that you're a lot of times right there.
A lot of times you'll get dispatched to, exactly, you'll get dispatched there, and once you get the nuts and bolts of what's going on, you can determine that the call might not be what you originally thought it was going to be when you were dispatched. The circumstances have changed, or more has been added that originally wasn't given to you. So that plays a big part in it. All the information that you get from the dispatcher isn't obviously all the information that's available or what took place. That happens more than not. I think the officers will go there and realize that they're dispatched to one type of incident. Once they get there, it's something totally different.
Something that comes up an awful lot in the dialogue is response to domestic violence issues or domestic issues and mental health issues. And I think it's one thing, you know, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, when there's a whole lot of resources available. It's different when a law enforcement officer shows up to one of those situations after hours, on a weekend, on a holiday, things like that. And we've got some folks on the line that could speak to that a little bit more, but there are some existing community partnerships and agency partnerships to handle that stuff. And I'm not sure how widely understood those partnerships are. Some of our law enforcement folks could potentially speak to that.
You know, believe it or not, the available resources, I mean, granted, during the day, the mental health staff is at, staffing the mental health center. You might be able to call somebody at Cayuga Counseling to get some advice or assistance. But during the day is a time when the mobile crisis is not available to us. And we've talked about, expanding, and I know that the sheriff has had some discussions about expanding the available time frame, because they don't come into service and be able to respond out to scenes until 5 o'clock. So that's a resource that's not available during the day that a lot of times is helpful. That the only time that we have access to that right now is from 5 o'clock to midnight. So after midnight, there's a little bit of a decrease in available services, and during the day, it sometimes it'd be nice to have somebody that's able to respond right to the scene with you.
Fred, will you just quickly explain what the mobile crisis team does and who they are with Liberty Resources?
So, and this is fairly new. This isn't something that's been around forever, but there are people, counselor or therapists, and people with mental health background that work on a rotating basis to be able to come out and provide kind of de-escalation or kind of on-site services for mental health situations where that we may be able to once the situation's kind of diffused and they get there, we may be able to turn that over to them, and they deal with the kind of setting up follow-up services and things like that. And we've been utilizing them, more and more as time goes on, and you get, it's one of those things that you become more and more comfortable with the more you use it, and you deal with the people. We've had people. We had a mental health mobile crisis team come out to a armed standoff situation that they happened to be familiar with the person who was in crisis. And it was very helpful in diffusing that situation.
Fred, can I ask quickly? You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. This mobile crisis team, you said that's something that's fairly new, or a new concept, because reading through, there was a lot of material, and I primarily concentrated on the APD policies and procedures, but I did have some time to touch on the sheriffs too. But there's a section on crisis intervention team, which sounds to me like it's supposed to be a collaboration between police and civilian. Is what you're talking about something that might be comparable to that?
Nicole can talk to that.
Yeah, so we have the crisis intervention team, which is actually compiled of various different mental health entities in the county, as well as state police, sheriff's office, and Auburn Police. So mobile crisis is actually different. Mobile crisis is run from Liberty Resources. They've been active for a couple of years now in our area. They actually talking about the going from after hours, midnight, because right now they're only from 5 to midnight. It is in the works for them to be able to be available more often. I think that's something that they're looking to do hopefully next year. They've talked about it. But so that crisis intervention team, that actually is something where we meet regularly. We meet once a month on a smaller level, and then we have a bigger committee that meets because of COVID, we haven't been meeting as often, but we meet quarterly for that.
Okay, and I mean, as far as resources that are available, I mean, are there resources both financially and I guess just personnel wise that these people are readily available to the police when they need them?
As far as like mobile crisis, or as far as?
Well, as far as any time there's a call that might involve, non-criminal complaint. I'm just wondering how available these resources are to the various police departments, law enforcement agencies.
Well, as far as mobile crisis, they're only available from 5 p.m. to midnight. But we call them and they come right out. And there's times when before we've gotten to the scene, when we know that it's, depending on how the call presents, we can actually get them started where we make it to the scene first. But, sometimes we're dealing with, calls up in Sterling or down in Genoa. Right. We can actually get them started and get them en route so that, we can get the people that the help that they need, if they need it to be like a mobile crisis type situation.
Okay, thank you.
So John.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Heather Petras, the Executive Director of Cayuga Counseling. How are you?
I'm good.
I just wanted to kind of expand a little bit on your question. So I do think that it's a funding issue. So my Article 31 OMH clinic, as well as the county mental health clinic, Article 31, we're held under rigid regulations. So we really can't go out into the community. It's not a billable service. So of course, everything comes back to funding, and we're only allowed a certain number of offsite visits that we can do. And it has to be around therapy, just because of the umbrella of services that an outpatient clinic offers. So any type of crisis intervention response like that definitely has to come from a different funding source. So I do think that that's why the mobile crisis team was limited in the hours. And I do think that as a county, they're trying to explore more funding opportunities to be able to, provide more hours and to help. And I just want to say to Fred, just kind of expand on Fred, that both of our clinics do have crisis walk-in availability, but again, we have to get the clients here. So law enforcement would have to drop them off to us, or have them get here somehow for us to be able, that handoff, for us to be able to see them during the day. But they can, if they can get here, or law enforcement can get them to our clinics, we can, see them. We have availability to do that during the day. And then both clinics also operate on-call services 24 hours a day.
Yeah, because the time I took to go through the policies and procedures, and I was actually quite impressed because it is pretty comprehensive and really well done. I think they did a nice job of at least addressing all the issues and putting up the infrastructure. But I'm always concerned, especially these days, that you can have the greatest plan in the world, but if you don't have the fiscal resources to implement it, we've got so many issues out there that we've learned so much about: drug addiction and domestic violence and mental health. And we can't expect our law enforcement to be experts at all this. All the national dialogue with all that's been going on as far as, the negative issues towards the police is, the thing they seem to keep coming back to is training, training, training. and which I don't get me wrong, I agree with that. But a police officer can't spend his entire work week in training, and the resources to provide that training. You know, my wife and I were lucky enough to take part in some specialized training the past year. And I thought that was excellent. Okay. And just so you know where I'm coming from, and I don't mean to ramble, please cut me off if I, but you know, with the things that my wife and I went through, we were lucky enough to be, I don't want to say connected with law enforcement, but we knew enough people. We knew the responding officers, the nights of and day of our tragedy. We knew the district attorney. We were treated so well. And when we took part in that training, I tried to stress to the law enforcement people in there how sensitive these issues are, these non-criminal issues. Not that ours weren't criminal, but I said, and how much it means to a victim. And, you know, that's difficult for them. I know it's difficult for our police officers with everything that they have to deal with. And that's why I think if we can have experts in those fields that can actually, I know this is asking a lot, that can respond to these calls with the officers, I think it would go a long way towards helping them and relieving some of the pressures that they're under when it comes to doing their job. I'll cut myself off at this point.
Thank you, John. Those are great points that you've made. And just one more item on this, crisis intervention teams. The Auburn Police Department policy that is putting forth that there will be an individual that'll be hired full-time for crisis intervention team. Is that in place now, or is that part of the policies? Just for everybody's information, if they review the policies that were distributed in together with Cayuga Counseling Services.
I don't think I understand what position you're talking about.
So the Auburn Police Department, one of the policies that the draft policies that are coming up specifically calls for a individual to be a crisis intervention specialist.
Steve, I can talk a little on that. I think that you're referring to the victim specialist that we house at APD.
Yes, that's it, Nicole.
Yes. So, so that program is in existence. It's a grant-funded federal program. Federal money pays for our victim specialists to be housed there, and she does provide crisis intervention and response, and it's all around victim-centered. So she is co-located there. She provides crisis intervention. She provides follow-up, referrals. She goes out with law enforcement. I think that's been put on hold since COVID, but doing follow-up and then making referrals to community-based agencies, providing advocacy as well. And we just received a grant, another federal grant, to house an additional victim specialist embedded in the sheriff's department as well. So as soon as that's executed at the federal level, we'll be moving forward with that as well.
Thank you, Heather. That's very good information. Jeff, should we move on to diversionary programs in the courts, alternatives to arrest and incarceration? And
yes, just to keep things moving. And for everybody, just remember, this isn't the total thing. You know, we're going to discuss these topics. We're going to assemble some notes to share with all of you and pass along to the police departments or the law enforcement agencies for some feedback. We'll get together again. If we need to, we can get together again and again. But yes, if we can get through the list of topics, that'll let us have a better feel for where we're at with the whole project. So the next topic on our list was diversionary programs in the courts. And again, we don't have the ability right here to deal with everything that happens in the courts, but we do have some of our elected officials and some folks that work within the court system that can certainly, if there's some discussion topics there, we can pass those along, but this group's not going to be able to necessarily really have a direct impact on that discussion. But any thoughts from our community members on diversionary programs or alternatives to incarceration?
I do. Again, I would like to know the process used to determine who gets assigned to an alternative to incarceration. And does a person like wear their welcome out on that? Like, you know, if I'm arrested because I have a drug problem, do I get to use that? Or is it like that youthful offender thing? Like you get it one and then that's it.
I think it's important to kind of lay the framework for Cayuga County, and we have drug court, we have misdemeanor drug court, we have felony drug court, we have there's another diversionary court like a mental health court, and the kind of the gatekeeper to those programs is the district attorney's office. So you know, the police department arrests somebody for whatever the charge is. It goes to the district attorney's office. The district attorney's office does an evaluation to determine whether or not they are appropriate for one of the specialty courts. And I sit on the team for felony drug court, so I have a little bit of insight there. Auburn had somebody on misdemeanor drug court. I don't know if that's still.
Yeah, we still do. Detective DeRosa, who works underneath me, actually sits on misdemeanor drug court. He also is supposed to be part of the mental health court. It's through city court. They haven't really been meeting as much. So there are a bunch of different ones. There's also, I believe isn't there still a domestic violence court, one of the other diversion programs, Fred?
Yeah. So we've got a lot of those things available, but it is the district attorney's office. I don't know that I can tell you that I know that there have been people who have been participating in felony drug court who have previously participated in misdemeanor drug court. One of the problems, I think, is determining if, as far as repeat people, you know, I think that is like drug court is you start off and they come in and they're coming in every week and they're reporting every day a lot of times, and then if there's something that you relapse, or you have a problem where you violated one of the rules, then there's an increased level of service or an increased level of care that's provided up to a certain point, and then they'll stay in that court for a number of years and hopefully conquer their addiction, or at least learn how to manage or mental health court, they learn how to manage their behavior or whatever. I think that one of the things that happens is there may be a thought process that if somebody did not make it through successfully one of these courts, and they were given these parameters that they had to follow, and they weren't able to follow them, it may be looked upon unfavorably for another spot in that court. I mean, the district attorney's office would have to weigh in on that, but that's kind of my experience.
Yeah. So my question is, if the charges are determined by the district attorney, how on board is he to this process? To having a different thought process to interacting with certain community members? Is he wanting to participate?
Well, I can tell you that the district attorney is, I speak about the district attorney as the office of the district attorney, and not necessarily the district attorney himself, because there's obviously there's a number of people there, and I work very closely with Diane Adset, who is also a member of the felony drug court team, and she is is constantly trying to evaluate and bring people into the programs. Now, obviously, you know, Diane's got a boss like anybody else, and you know,
Sure,
ruled. But I think that I'd love to see more people in these diversionary programs like felony drug court. I think that we've got some space, and
yeah.
you know.
So I'll give you an example. Because I sit on the NAACP and also the Human Rights Commission, we get a lot of phone calls. And, you know, people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. You know, you're breaking the law. But what we found is there are a lot of people that are doing drugs. So when I'm preaching to the choir here, you know, they're under the influence, they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing. But we're finding that a number of people are being told at the level that they are, you know, about to get charged or maybe even sentence, I didn't know you had a drug addiction.
Well,
so it seems to be maybe certain selections of this community are being told one thing. And I don't necessarily think that is a race thing. It could also be a class and socioeconomic thing, but there's a certain segment of this community being denied services because of the criminal behavior.
So I think that Lloyd might be able to help us out a little bit, because I think that there's a number of people who should be advocating for these people along the way. And
sure.
And one of them would be their defense attorney, who should be finding out that information. I would think that they are suffering from a drug addiction, or that they've got, you know, these different things that they may qualify for a specific court.
Right. If I could just jump in real quick, I think one of the most substantial changes that I've seen in the history of our criminal justice system is the implementation just this year in February of a centralized arraignment facility. And what I mean by that is that nobody, whether you're rich or poor, will ever go before a judge without being represented by legal counsel. We've never had that opportunity before. You know, people would be arraigned in the middle of the night before a town justice, or they would get Judge McCune at the time, or Judge Thurston out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning for an arraignment. That is all changed now. And as a coincidence with the bail reform and the new discovery laws, we now have in place a centralized arraignment at the public safety building, in which defendants who are arrested will have available to them legal counsel at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Never had that before. And so they now have an attorney with them at their arraignment. So I think that has changed significantly in terms of progress we're making to make sure everyone is represented.
Lloyd,
yeah, but I'm specifically talking about drilling down even from there.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Drilling down from there, where people are represented, and Chad is available, and Chad has actually advocated, and people are still being told, we didn't know that you had a drug addiction. So I'm drilling down, pulling back all of those, you know, those pieces of the onion. I'm pulling all of that back. So my question is the district attorney's office interested in hearing that there might be a different process, that the city would like to view a different process?
I guess you'd have to ask him.
So I agree. I think that that, you know, Jeff, when we reconvene, it might not be a bad idea to ask, you know, the district attorney if he might be willing to sit in for a little while and maybe answer some of these questions.
Right. So in response to that conversation that's been going on, I wrote a few notes. First of all, to get some clarification from the district attorney's office on process, and to see if we can get some participation related to this. discussion the next time around. And also in the very beginning, I mentioned something, and that was that there is concurrent to this process, and not necessarily officially related to it, but Cayuga County is working through an update for their alternatives to incarceration plan as well. And a lot of people that are in this group are also involved in that conversation. I'm not sure who the best one would be to speak to that. I'm involved with that as a guest, but I think maybe Lloyd Hoskins, are you able to maybe give us a little bit more detail on that process and that requirement?
Yeah, I really think Heather would be more appropriate.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Lloyd.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I'll give you the quick version. So there is an ATI committee, and it does focus around alternatives to incarceration. It's made up of various stakeholders. It is through the New York State Department of Criminal Justice Services, and it's called a 13A classification. There are required members. So we have the sheriff, law enforcement, CHAD, mental health, probation, Aileen McNabb, so the legislature, Lloyd, just the various stakeholders that are required to have a seat on this board, as well as a victim who has been through the process, court, had background with law enforcement, so an offender, and then also a victim also are required on there. And so what we do is we look at the various alternative to incarceration and diversion programs that the county has available and is offering, and we kind of evaluate those services and look at their utilization, the statistics, trends, and those types of things. So I can talk a little bit about the services that Cayuga Counseling is contracted to provide. So we provide what is called pretrial diversion, pretrial release, thinking for a change, and community service. So with the bail reform, some of this changed. Obviously, pretrial release has changed significantly because we're no longer, housing people in the jail. So the judges have available our program to provide community supervision. We're checking in if the judges order it. We also do electronic monitoring for the real high risk cases. And again, all of that's court ordered. So Rhoda, the judges are completely on board with those programs, as well as community service. So the judges would be the one to order community service instead of, jail or incarceration as their sentence. So they utilize these programs a lot. Pretrial diversion is for first-time misdemeanor offenses, ages 16 to 21. Again, that's changed a lot over the years with Raise the Age, because 16 and 17-year-olds are no longer going to criminal court for any type of misdemeanor. But that's more of a case management, also supervision program where we're identifying needs. So say there's mental health needs, there's drug and alcohol needs. We're making recommendations and making sure that the clients are following up with that. They're also getting case management once a week, doing community service, and then we're reporting that back to the judge so that their record could be, that charge could be dropped once they complete all of those components. And again, that comes from the DA's office, that recommendation.
I just want to say, I'm familiar with a good chunk of those programs from my other job. So, and they definitely work. I just want it to be known there's a sliver of this community that doesn't get that. They're just not offered it.
Hey, Rhoda, so this is Jeff. I'm taking some notes on the discussion, and again, the follow-up questions that we'll pass along to the appropriate folks to get some feedback on those.
Can I just add one thing? I wonder how available all those options are for somebody who doesn't speak English. What's the accessibility? Like how many of the people that would be involved in there could be supportive of a non-English speaker who's a member of our community?
So I can speak a little bit to our programs. We do contract, Cayuga Counseling contracts with a interpreting service out of Syracuse. We pay for everything. It's always at no cost to our clinic clients or any client, our child advocacy center, any client of Cayuga Counseling's to utilize that. It is difficult though. We do have to call in advance. Sometimes we have to wait, so it delays service, you know, sometimes, but we do have a contract with them.
Our attorneys, we're fortunate that we do have 2 attorneys in our pool of 34. I have 34 attorneys that cover legal cases. We do have 2 attorneys on board that speak a couple languages, and so they're very helpful. But as Heather said too, we contract out. Sometimes we have to, if there's a conflict with the attorney, we'll have to contract with, you know, professional service for interpreting services.
Okay.
Anything else related to that topic? That's a big topic. A lot going on with it. We get that. And again, we'll provide some appropriate follow-up to some of those questions. Steve?
I think we should move on to community partners. I know that Fred Cornelius, when he circulated some of the sheriff's material, gave a list of community partners, and many of them are representative in these groups that we have today. Why don't we put that on the table and talk about community partners that are indeed part of the process and part of the conversation, and maybe are there community partners that are not participating in part of the dialogue that we're having on community relations and policing.
Anybody want to jump into that topic? Any thoughts from our folks in the community? Again, as Steve mentioned, there's a list circulating with some Sheriff's Department community partners as well as Auburn Police Department. Many of those are the same types of partnerships. But
I have a question. Is there representation from CHAD or any of the OASIS or drug and alcohol providers?
Within one of these 3 groups or within this particular group?
No, within one of the 3.
Let me look real quick. I believe they were reached out to, but I don't know that we ended up with any participation from them. No, we don't have any participation. I am almost certain that they were reached out to, but may not have been able to commit the time to do that.
Okay, thanks.
But certainly if there's questions or comments related to the services they provide, we'll follow up with those agencies. And of course, if there's any agencies that or services in general that anybody on this call thinks would be worthwhile to investigate, we can do that.
Well, Jeff, without really too much more comment on community partners, I think maybe everybody's aware that there are some community partners. And as you said, if there's any that we feel are missing or are not represented at the table, we should, you know, let's use this as a forum to bring those people to the table and bring it to the attention of our partners in the public safety realm. Let's move on to expectations from the community. What kind of police force is required and what does the community expect? That's kind of an open-ended question. Let's put that out to the community partners. What are the expectations from the community, either from your own perspective or from what you are hearing in the community as far as the type of police, the type of public safety being involved?
I can say at school at Union Springs, we've had a handful of different SRO officers throughout the years. And from within the school community, it seems like a fabulous program. The kids really get to know an officer. There's a lot of a strong relationship that develops between the kids and the officer and the kids. What I don't know personally is how that continues after school. Do any of the law enforcement officers who are here have a sense that those relationships maybe facilitate things beyond school when these kids move out of high school and move into the community as adults? Do those relationships carry over? Is there any continued benefit from that time that they shared between 7th and 12th grade?
I can say that Bobby Guarneri was the school resource officer at Union Springs. And I know that he actually still has relationships with a lot of those kids that he, well, you know, now they're adults. Like one, he got invited to their wedding, and you know, different people still reach out to him, and he still stays in contact with several of them. But that's the only one that I know of, you know, that I can speak.
Kathy, we see the same thing. I have one of my detectives was actually a former SRO, and we actually just went out on an incident the other day, and the kids knew him. They knew him from schools, and he's been out of there for a while, and they started talking to him like they're ready to invite us for dinner. I didn't know the kids, but I became instant family, you know, which is kind of nice to, you know, it's a nice feeling to have that. So he's got a little gift there that, you know, he's had that opportunity to touch a lot of kids. And I remember when Officer Roden used to work for us the same way. He was such a big, tall guy that people would remember him, not maybe from the SRO program, but through the DARE portion when he was doing that, and everybody would remember who he was. So we definitely see an impact, at least for us within the city community, of being able to see kids later on, or SROs end up seeing them later on, even if they're no longer an SRO. If they're in adulthood, they see them and they have different impacts on them. So definitely there's a good tie there.
For sure. I can see that benefit continuing on just through those relationships. And I know it wouldn't necessarily have this, that relationship wouldn't have the strength maybe of a crisis intervention team, but like you said, it could just help facilitate or de-escalate a situation, smooth out some feelings if those relationships are encouraged beyond school. Or if there's any other programs where officers could connect with students in school and maybe develop those relationships before we're at a crisis, so that when we're in crisis, whether it's with students or with adults who've moved on, there's something already established between law enforcement and the person in crisis or the family in crisis.
I can speak, I think, a little bit about Auburn Police Department. I try to do a ride along at least twice a year. Oftentimes I'll ride with an officer who's a former SRO. And I've seen firsthand that knowledge of a young individual's home life from that officer, and that officer being able to intervene and de-escalate the situation because he knows the background. One specific instance happened at Auburn Hospital. They were trying to restrain a young man, and it was getting pretty bad, and the officer I was with heard it over the radio, and he went and he was able to talk that young man, for lack of a better phrase, off the ledge, and really get him to calm down and solve the issue that he was facing. And as far as that intervention and building relationships, I think there's numerous examples, at least in Auburn Police Department, and I think in the Sheriff's Department too. Shop with a Cop, Major Palooza's collecting donations to deliver food tomorrow for Thanksgiving. And that's all the students within the school districts that teachers identify that there's a need. So those officers are showing up in a role that they're trying to help, right? Provide Thanksgiving dinner and really just build that relationship with at-risk students in the school district. So I just think those are some good examples.
Yeah, there's no shortage of examples. You know, my opinion on the SROs, they are invaluable.
Yep.
I think they're so important. They give parents peace of mind and they give kids peace of mind. I can personally speak, my grandson at times was very intimidated, afraid to go to school because of the shootings that he saw on TV. I've seen the relationships that the kids build. We have a granddaughter. We raise our granddaughter, and she attends Wasco School. And Kyle mentioned one of his detectives. I think I know who he's talking about. The kids actually, they loved Sean. But the most important thing I think about that is, we're talking about community relations. It starts with the young kids. That's where it starts. They have respect for the police officers if they interact with them in the right setting, in the right way. I don't mean by being arrested. I mean, in a school settings, police officers, they learn to trust them. And if they trust them, they'll respect them. And since we're talking about community relations and what the community expects, I think the number one thing that the community expects from their law enforcement is they want to trust them. And I think for the most part, we're lucky in this. I believe that most people do trust them. And anything we can do to reinforce that and give the police more resources. I actually, reading through the policies, 341.2, the policy actually is in there. Foot patrols, community policing supervisor, who actually serves as a PR person, surveys, programs, activities, meetings, youth activities, training, how to interact with the youth. That stuff is all in there. Again, I always worry, are the resources available to further reinforce this and give the policemen more opportunities? Because I feel we have a prime opportunity. We have a young police force, at least in my opinion, and I think they can connect with kids well if they have the resources and are enabled to do that.
I can speak a little bit about our community collaboratives and relationships. So obviously, Cayuga Counseling is involved in many collaborative programs with law enforcement. So to go back a little bit to talk about the mental health response. So we, at our clinic, we rely upon APD to come and help us. There are times when we are in crisis, when our clients are in crisis, when we need to get our clients to the hospital and we can't. So we call them to come help us. And the response, it has improved so much over the past 10 years. I can't even, tell you how happy we are with the response. I do think a lot of that is because of training and also leadership. So just to let everybody know about that. I think we still all struggle with some of the legislation and, the systemic issues of mental health, but the response is just absolutely like night and day with that. Then also in our child and adolescent day treatment program. So that's a collaborative effort with BOCES. We're housed at BOCES campus, and that we work with the Sheriff's Department with. Our SRO is out of the Sheriff's Department. And Nicole actually was like one of our first, if not the first, I want to say, SRO that we ever had. And so that was such an incredible thing for us to have at day treatment. We could not be happier with that. There were a lot of bumps after Nicole left. Again, I do think it has a lot to do with training, and somebody really has to want to be there in those positions to do that kind of work. And then through our Child Advocacy Center and all of our MDTs, I can say that, I have the opportunity to go and observe detectives doing interviews on children who have been abused out of all of law enforcement. So Sheriff's Department, APD, as well as the state police. And that is so incredible to watch how wonderful they do with those kids. And that has come such a long, long way as well. I think all of our relationships. So I think that, and us being able to actually house a victim specialist within a law enforcement agency, I mean, that's just huge and so progressive. It does cause me a little bit of anxiety, knowing that Sean's going to leave. I've worked with Sean for 20 years. We both moved up together in a sense, him being in the police department, me being in human services. So he's always been there to listen to some of my crazy ideas about, victim services and let's do this and let's do that, and always has been supportive. So I think from a community partner perspective, it does cause me a little bit of anxiety, that he's going to retire, but I'm really hopeful that we will have somebody in that position that will, be as progressive and as collaborative as him. Same thing when Dave Gould left. I worked with Dave for years, and Brian, came right in, filled those shoes, is a great community partner. So I can't say enough about that. And it's great for me to be able to pick up a phone if I do have an issue with law enforcement, or somebody has made a complaint to me about an incident that occurred, that I can call and I can say, and not, you know, be worried about what's going to happen, but say, listen, this happened. Can you just look into this? It's concerning. And, you know, they're so responsive. So I did want to make sure that I shared that with the group.
You're going to hear me say often, and this is probably why I was invited, there's a certain segment of this community that does not have that privilege to interact in that way. So I want to really quickly, we talked about the SROs. My two children had a wonderful relationship with the SROs at the high school, probably because I'm intentional about building my relationships with people that sit in those positions. But I want you to think about it from this perspective. So BTW, the after school program, they also house a after school program at Genesee Street School. And, you know, we often throw around the term, you know, at risk, troubled. And that's what a lot of our babies down there are. You know, they're considered at risk in that trouble. So when you have the SRO responding to behavioral issues, oftentimes our babies' first interactions with police officers are due to them being bad. So that just gets layered. So there's this fear that happens, and whether it is perceived or whether it is, you know, I'm gonna take this on from you because somebody is pushing your stuff onto me, or it is actually happening to people. There's this fear about what will the interaction look like. So if I call, how do I present myself? So, and if we're talking about kids that have only, you know, been able to interact with police officers in the after school program because they've been bad, that's going to set the stage for the rest of their lives.
I've got a question, I guess, on kids being bad, because for like our SRO program, for instance, we have our officers not get involved in things in school in particular that they wouldn't have gotten involved in out on the street. So if a kid is, you know, acting out and a teacher wouldn't have called the police before, then we tell them that's not something that you should be involved in, because we don't want it to be, oh, you know, there's this heavy that's at the school that's handy to come and deal with this behavioral problem. And that was a kind of an evolution of the program over time, because we saw these negative consequences of police officers being involved in those kind of situations where it's like, you know, Billy won't come in off of the swing set. Well, that's not a police problem. That's not something that we shouldn't be dragging Billy in off the police, you know, off the swing set. And I think that that's a change in law enforcement, I think, anyways, that's evolving as we speak, that the police are trying to not get involved in things that really aren't our concern. You know, it hasn't risen to the level of police involvement. It's hard though when you get called to that situation, and then you're standing there and people are looking at you like, what are you going to do? And we're like, well, it's really not, you know, it's not my gig right now. And a lot of times the police officers feel like, well, maybe if I try and deal with this situation now, it isn't going to get any worse. And sometimes that's maybe not the right answer, but I do think that there have been these conversations about, should we be involved in this?
Right. So I'm gonna take what John Sochi said. He says it's a lack of resources, and it is 100% a systemic problem because there aren't enough resources. And we all know that the school district isn't getting their fair share of the budget. So So when we have our SRO officers in the building, you know, they're not going to say, no, I can't go help you, because they're there to also give support. So what happens are the teacher and the administrators, they begin to depend on them as a part of, can you help us get this classroom settled down? And it happens. It happens. There was a situation last month where that happened. Innocent. It was an innocent call, but the outcome of it, and nobody could have predicted that. So I just want to say that might be a governing philosophy, but when you're in a situation and a teacher looks desperate or an administrator looks desperate and they're at their wit's end, how do you not help? So, and you're the person who has probably the most training in that hall room at that time. How do you not help? And it does put the police in a bad position.
I agree. And that's one of those things that I know when I was out at BOCES, you know, there was some stuff looking back that I probably shouldn't have gotten involved in, but I was there and people are looking to you like, you know, aren't you going to do something? I think part of that is learning what to get involved in and what not to get involved in. And that falls, you know, on training and part of it's learning as the SRO goes. But I also think that it's repair, what you were speaking to also is repairing that relationship afterwards. So let's say that the police come in and the SRO comes in and they're there for a legitimate reason and having to act on, you know, something that's going on. I think part of that is the police officer does what they need to do in that situation, but then them going back and repairing that relationship afterwards. Like if you do have to, you know, they do have to put hands on a kid or arrest a kid, it's, you know, having that time and, you know, having it be part of the process to try to repair that relationship afterwards.
Absolutely. That is a must. Absolutely. And I don't think they have time to, because I think people blink and it's the end of the day.
Right.
Before you have a chance to get back to 9 o'clock.
Right.
Rhoda, if I could follow up with you, is part of the resources that are lacking, not necessarily not having an SRO officer, but not having school personnel that are there to handle the situation and therefore not needing to call the SRO? Just for clarification.
Yeah. So clarification, if we were fully funded, we could have a social worker in each building. And then the social worker could have a case manager under them in each building. Each building could also have a guidance counselor. So you have like a team of 3 people that are, you know, well-trained, well-educated. And it would be this group of people that would be interacting with like the teachers' aides, because oftentimes the teachers' aides are also put into that role of crisis interventionist, which is a part of their responsibility. But if the crisis interventionists have like a one-time training and they're never getting those booster shots, they're kind of left to their memory about how do I de-escalate this situation. So if we were fully funded as a district, we'd have well-trained people in the building giving solid guidance to the people that need to interact when there is a crisis going on. And then at the end of the day, our SRO officers are there mainly for safety, but they're also there, you know, they can build those relationships and they're not, and then they have to focus so much on like, how do I repair this now? But they're in that role of safety and high-fiving kids and asking kids how they're doing. And the kids never experience that as a, oh, well, you called, you know, Officer Cornelius because I'm bad again, and here he comes.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that has something they want to add to what kind of police response, what kind of a police force we want to see in this community, in the Cayuga County and the City of Auburn community? And if not, that's fine. We can move on to sort of procedural justice because we have a number of items in that category to discuss before we close out the conversation today.
Can I just say we would like a well-diverse police department with women and people of color and women in positions of power.
that you know what, that's a very good point. You know, I mentioned earlier that I think the community wants to trust their police department. That's what they want. But I think there's two things, and you know, whether we believe it or not, they want justice, they want the law, they want it to be applied equally to all. You know, too often we have to make, and I don't mean to imply that the Auburn police are racist or anything like that. Please don't interpret it that way. I have the utmost respect for them. But what we have to do is we have to make it so that the community feels that way. You know, Rhoda, you brought up some very interesting points. A child's first experience with the police shouldn't be a bad one. That sets the tone quite possibly through the rest of their life. But then again, we have to say, well, what are the alternatives? And Heather and Nicole, I think, gave us some alternatives. But I just feel that, you know, too often we have to make a choice because of limited resources. Do we go with a needs-based approach, or do we ration the limited resources we have? And too often we choose to ration them equally, you know, even on a national scale. You know, how many times has an education policy rewarded the richer districts, the districts that do well? You know, the No Child Left Behind, for instance. You know, let's test the school districts, and the ones that do well get more money. Did that make sense? No, that didn't make sense. The ones who don't do well because they didn't have the resources that the richer district. And I think we have to make a decision as a community how we want to apply our limited resources.
John, you're trying to light a fire under Rhoda. I can see it. I mean, it's just smoldering right now. And she jumped in there and she tried to slide it in under the wire. You saw how she was kind of hopping back and forth about diversifying our police force and getting women and minorities into these positions. And I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't say that we are trying. I mean, we are going to Booker T, and we're having the annual, you know, night out and doing all the things that we're trying to do. And I just don't know the answer, because you know, the system is fairly rigid, and I don't see that changing with regard to, you know, we have a civil service test, which is kind of step one. And in order to progress any farther, you have to do well there. And then, you know, there's all these other steps in the process. But in order to even be considered, you have to clear that first hurdle.
Fred, honestly, I'm lucky enough to know people like you, Chief Butler, Sheriff Shank, and I know how hard it is to recruit. I believe me, I have talked with both of them recently. I know it, but the rest of the community doesn't know it, you know? So we got choices. We either got to work harder to find diversity, or we've got to make the community aware that they're trying. Community, step up and let's be part of this, you know?
I think that as far as women go, man, we're almost getting overrun by women out here at the sheriff's office. I mean, the maybe not quite that much,
I don't know that that's the case.
but we, you know, I think that, you know, we've got 4 open positions right now, and you know, we're in the early stages of the process, but we sent two women to the police academy out of 5 in the last academy, and it wouldn't surprise me if we've got some really, really good female candidates that I'm excited about. So and if we could get some minority candidates in the pool.
You know what I think, Fred, and I'm going to say this often, we have to grow our own. So if we cannot find a solution from recruitment, we have to grow our own. But I mean from the elementary stages. So we need to, identify, kids that, have a certain personality. And we all know, like in middle school, they take that, there's an exam that they take, which kind of tells their guidance counselor what track a kid is going to go on. So not all kids are going to go to college. Some kids are going to be more technical. And I think it's like at that stage, and I think that's either 6th or 7th grade, that guidance counselors need to then have conversations with our community civil service folks to say, I have 100 students. This is how they scored. And we think that there probably are 4 or 5 or maybe even 10 people, these young kids, in this cohort of students, we might have 3 police officers, 3 sheriffs, we might have 4 firemen, but we need to build relationships in the 7th grade so that kids, so that they know, it's intentional, because to have somebody in 11th grade to say, do I want to be a police officer now, or do I want to be a firefighter? I don't know if I want to run in the building. All of those things are happening. But if we introduce these, successful opportunities when they're in the 6th or the 7th grade, I think that that's when the shift in thinking can happen.
Well, it might be, I mean, I don't know, if we could do it resources wise, but, for like Auburn Police and the Sheriff's Department to partner up and do some sort of like Explorer program or something like that, because that targets that age of kids.
Yes.
And Alpola does the criminal justice for BOCES, to try to get him involved and maybe do something along that lines as a kind of grow your own.
Yeah, you have those kids pegged. So like every year you'd be interacting with those kids. And I'm going to say that ugly word, grooming. So Heather, don't be mad at me. So we're grooming these kids. We're grooming our next city's leadership. It's not tested. It hasn't been researched, but I think that's how we're going to solve our problems. We're going to grow our own.
Fred, is the civil service test a barrier?
I'm reluctant to say that it's a barrier, because we are getting good candidates. Unfortunately, we're not getting a big number of good minority candidates. And by good, I
Right.
just mean accessible. That we can reach.
Because of the test. I'm a big person about this, that if you want to fix a system that's broken, why, with the test.
And I think
that's a barrier.
It is a barrier. I think that there was a reason for it when it was established, and I think that if you're going to go up against civil service, you're going to need a helmet. But
yeah, I know.
I think that it's not just the test. We had some good minority candidates that made that first hurdle, and then we went to the physical agility test, and I'm going to tell you, there was a couple of probably 3 or 4 seemingly good shape, very athletic candidates of color that didn't pass the physical agility test. And I remember standing there with the undersheriff going, what happened? This was our guy. This is, and that's a local thing. So the physical agility part, we can potentially address that. And obviously you need to have people who are physically capable of doing the job. But I haven't had to run 1.5 miles on the job in a long time. So I don't know that that's really the test. Should that be the test? And that's something that's probably a discussion worth having.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Unless there's other comments or considerations under what kind of community policing to expect, let's move on to procedural justice. I know Lloyd is here and he might be able to speak to some of this, but the first topic is implicit bias. And I think we all kind of know what implicit bias is. And then the second topic is de-escalation. And with regard to the time, it's 4:30 now, and I know that there's a council meeting tonight that some people have to leave for, about 10:02, I believe. So let's just put implicit bias and de-escalation techniques together on the table and see if there's anybody that has any concerns or comments about either of those two factors in public safety and procedural justice. Anybody?
So this is more of a question than a comment, I suppose, but a lot of my friends, a lot of my neighbors don't necessarily have the legal documentation to be in our country, and yet they are members of our community working. They often have children in our schools who might or might not have the legal documentation to be in our country. And I know many of them who are very fearful about ever calling on any police officer for anything, because they fear that what the reason that they're calling about, whether it be a domestic situation, whether it be a social situation with neighbors, will snowball into questioning their legality in the country. And I know Brian Skank has been wonderful about when he's come out and spoken with them. He's made it very clear that he's there to address a situation and not their documentation, and separated those two so that these people could speak their concerns freely. I don't know how that is like in the city of Auburn. I'm not questioning, and I don't know how that is, but I do know that as our community grows, folks with different levels of legality in our community, that becomes a barrier to them seeking out police help and support, I guess, when they have situations of violence, of alcohol or drugs or any of those other situations that people deal with and they need law enforcement support. Is there any specific rules or anything like that that speak to that situation and how to deal with people who have layers, I guess, of concern as far as law enforcement and interacting with law enforcement?
Kathy, in terms of the attorney perspective, it is a real issue. We've had, probably as you know, migrants being arrested and finding out that they have no paperwork, or ICE is on their trail. We do have a couple attorneys that specialize in immigration. Mario Gutierrez is in Buffalo probably twice a week on immigration issues. He's kind of our go-to attorney, but that is an issue. We don't have enough training on the immigration laws, and I'd like to see that expand so that we have more attorneys at least know the legal ramifications of immigration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know some people who had violent situations in their home, and they absolutely would not call law enforcement out of fear. And so they just kind of had to deal with it privately. And as you can see, that's not healthy for anybody. And I didn't know how to guide them because I knew that their fear is legitimate. And I don't know the burden that law enforcement carries about having to follow through if they uncover if somebody doesn't have their paperwork. I didn't know what to tell them. So
the answer for the sheriff's department is that if we respond to a situation, a domestic violence situation, or whatever that may be, that shouldn't be a question that we're asking. If somebody was yelling and screaming, they're illegal, it's probably not something we're going to ignore. we would maybe make an inquiry, but we also, that's not going to be the focus of the interaction. And right. it's a situation where it would be hard for us to just say, you know, cover our ears and say, you know, we're not going to address that. But the other thing is we've come to the, you know, understanding that simply being in the country undocumented is not a criminal offense. So that's a civil issue for Customs and Border Patrol or whoever. So the only time that that a sheriff's deputy is going to take any kind of action at all is if there was a criminal offense. Like if somebody called us and said, hey, this guy who works on this farm has a judicial warrant for illegal reentry. He's been deported, come back. Now we know he's here, and we would detain that person for somebody to come and pick up. But just being here undocumented isn't an issue that we're going to get involved in.
Okay.
I would just like to add for both of the implicit bias and de-escalation policies, like what type of training is that specifically? Is it like teacher student training? Is there an application part, you know, to that training so that they can kind of apply? And maybe it's scenario based. And is that like an annual thing? Like, do they get these, I call them shots in the arms, but, you know, do they get this training, these refreshers annually? Because, you know, we've all gone to trainings where we've got the certificate that we completed it, but we were playing it, you know, on our phones. So my thought is there a way to really test do you have the content?
Kyle?
The last time we did implicit training, we actually went over to Syracuse University and they set the whole department. I'm thinking it was about 2 years ago, but we do annual stuff all the time. So we're currently going through a lot of our annual training on various topics. So it's not just one, there's so many things we have to do on a yearly basis, from workplace harassment, sexual harassment, workplace violence, things about chemicals, all that stuff. I mean, so a lot that gets thrown in. We have a lot of stuff that's digitized. So it's the digitized training platform that we do. Some of our personnel, I believe, there's quizzes on some of that, and hands-on for some of that. I think with the last time that I did the hands-on was with, or at least it was a scenario based, was we went to Syracuse University, we did it. To say that we've done that recently to that level, no. But we're still getting an annual thing. Do I think we need more? Yes. The problem is it's still by budgetary constraints and be able to find time to fit that all in there. I mean, if we were to get an unlimited training budget, I'd say, give it to me and we'll take it. But we also got to be realistic about what the confines are for the people within the city, you know, the taxpayer base and stuff like that. It's not always feasible, but we'd love to be able to send more people to do continuing training. I'm a big proponent on it. I believe the more you're educated, the better you are to help the people that you're out there dealing with on a daily basis. Because I'm still learning today. If I got to that point I wasn't, I would say it's time to leave. So yeah, I think we're just kind of at that stage where I think there's more stuff that we could be doing. It's just sometimes it's always falls back onto that money aspect. Yeah. I hope that kind of answered your question a little bit.
It does. It does. Thank you, Mr. Platt. You know, John Sochi said it best: resources, resources.
The state says that that police, believe it or not, the accreditation standard says that police officers should get 21 hours of annual training, and which is ridiculously low. I mean, when it comes down to it, we do a day of training a month, a shift of training a month. So we do about 90 hours a year, and and it is a strain to do that, you know, and we may miss a month here and there because of a major incident or something going on, but we're in the process of kind of putting together, okay, this training we need every year, this training we need every other year, this training we need quarterly, you know, and we're putting together that outline so that we don't miss something that's important on an annual basis. And you know, use of force training, de-escalation training, implicit bias training, those are all on the list of annual requirements. Now, what does annual requirements mean? I don't know that we've quite figured that out yet. It may be, you know, every other year we have a more formal, you know, training, a sit-down training kind of thing, and annually, you know, we're doing a training basically on our policy to reaffirm our policy, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Thank you.
Rhoda, I'd like to add maybe a little bit there too. I was sharing a document today from the chief, and it looks like currently, as of today's date, we've done, for our agency, we've done 15,000 hours of training for our personnel, which is a lot. Like what Fred says, we're doing things every single month. I mean, it takes up a lot of time. A lot of that's digitized. Well, our guys are, you know, a lot of it's, they do it on their own. There's some stuff we're doing is role training through our roll call. We also do, there's also scheduled trainings that our personnel go off to off-site as well, or we're doing it departmental wide. So I mean, there is a lot of that that's going on annually, but we'd always be able to like to do more in different areas. I mean, it, like you said, you know, a lot of it's because it's a money issue. It always falls back to that.
You know what I was thinking, since both the police department and the sheriff's department, you all are training above and beyond. And we often say Auburn is an anomaly because we are so blessed. We don't have these national problems in this community. Did you ever consider that part of the reason why we don't is because of the amount of training that both agencies are doing?
I think that's absolutely a reason that you know, and it's progressive leadership. It's all those different things, because I think that you know, most organizations, but police agencies in particular, will follow the leader. You know, if you've got a leader that doesn't care about this or that, then the rank and file end up not caring about this or that. But if you've got somebody who is leading appropriately, appointing the right people to critical positions underneath them that share their philosophy and their vision, then the young people, and we've got some young people, you know, they're going to do the right thing. They're going to, because that's what they're doing. They're looking to emulate the people above them. So if you've got the right people in the right positions, then you're going to be all right.
I agree.
Other than Kyle, I think the PD is doing great.
And just to speak on the de-escalation, last year, several members of the sheriff's office, the county dispatch, state police, and Auburn police all attended a week-long training that was responding to like critical incidents. And it was on de-escalation tactics and, you know, being empathetic and kind of looking at it and to responding to those situations like that kind of differently and you know, kind of a more specialized training. And there was a plan for someone from Auburn Police and the Sheriff's Office to go to kind of like a train the trainer so that we could bring it back to our departments. It unfortunately got canceled because of COVID. But I do believe that they're going to be scheduling another one for this year. And I think Auburn was trying to send somebody this year as well. I know the Sheriff's Department was. And so to kind of to bring that back and do more of that training, you know, cycle everyone through that training.
It's going to be perfect.
You know, as just a possibility I'd like to throw out, you know, we talk about resources, limited resources, and in particular money. Training costs money. But do we have local resources that we could possibly take advantage of? And as an example, Sheriff Skank and I've only involved in the beginning, we approached the college, and it was actually the sheriff who headlined it. I was just tagged along with him, kind of. And to take advantage of the media department there, the communications professors, and an individual class in particular, to possibly do videos for HEAL, PSA type things. I'm wondering, when it comes to training, is, we have the college, and, we may think of it as just a little 2-year college, but these are accredited professors, and, the social sciences, they have a great faculty up there. And I'm wondering if, maybe we have some resources right within our community that we could take advantage of if the hierarchy of our police agencies, which I believe they do. I believe we have the right people that believe in training and are willing to just embrace as much training as they can get, provided they believe it's useful and would enhance their departments. Maybe that's something we should consider. We may have resources right within our community that would be, a bargain, for lack of a better term.
I think of Heather's organization. All of her folks are licensed and certified. They could train de-escalation or crisis intervention. I think of the folks at mental health. All those people are licensed and certified, and they have to have X amount of hours a year. And then they continue to get recertified every 2 or 3 years. So they are like a wealth of knowledge. And that might even be free.
Yeah, definitely. Anyways, I'll speak for our agency. We would definitely do stuff for free. And then also a lot of us, organizations like Cayuga Counseling, have a pretty good training budget. And if we don't, we have very good resources and relationships throughout the state that can provide a lot of training for free and collaborative, as long as we can make a good argument about how our community would benefit and how we're going to use this. So I know, we share a lot of our training budget, especially for our child advocacy center, with APD and with the sheriff's department, because I'm huge believing in that whole MDT training. We all go together, it builds cohesiveness, they buy into, and get a better understanding of what it is that we do too, and we get a better understanding of what they do. So I will say both departments are very receptive to that, and, do send people, and I think it's, so definitely, I think there's a lot of community resources that can be tapped into.
That's a good cap on implicit bias and de-escalation and trainings. It sounds like we have the leadership in place and the staff that's committed to training. And what we just talked about was what Rhoda talked about, was grow your own resources. So that's along the line of what we've all been talking about this afternoon. We have a couple of things left, and we have very little time left, but they are transparency, media and public communication by the departments, and back and forth, vice versa. The complaint process, which there's a very specific and open complaint process on all of the policies that were distributed to everybody, if you've had a chance to look at them. And community input, having a voice to ensure trust and fairness. And we talked a lot about trust today. So let's put those three things on the table: the media and public communication, an open and equitable complaint process, and community input, having a voice to ensure that you have the opportunity to do input, which is exactly what we're trying to do today. And put that on the table until it's time to wrap up.
Steve, I've got a question I don't know the answer to, so I'd ask Kyle or Greg or Fred. Do either agency have a civilian review board?
No. It's it's one of the things that's been talked about, and I think that there are from our perspective, I think there are a number of pros and cons to implementing that particular program. I think that there are a number of things that we are doing and looking at as far as transparency and community input. The discussion often goes to, you know, if you have non-police officers gauging whether or not a police officer is doing something appropriately, oftentimes you know, I don't want to, and I'm going to come off like a jerk here and I'm not going to be able to help it, but you know, I wouldn't go and ask to be on a medical review board because I don't know what the doctor is supposed to do, you know. And there are a lot of things that police officers do that are completely within the bounds of appropriate responses to situations that may look to an outsider to be, you know, just over the top. Some, you know, the example that I give is taking a person into custody with 3 police officers as opposed to 1 police officer is safer for the person and for the police officers, but it's looked at by, you know, for lack of a better term, a or a lay person to be, you know, over the top or ganging up on somebody or something like that when it's actually safer. So I think that there may be a place for that input, but there would have to be some significant education, you know, to go along with it.
Brad, is there any mechanism for law enforcement to share that or educate that with the public and help us understand, like how we would want you to understand where we're coming from?
Right, and I think that part of that process, I think that we do engage in that discussion. Unfortunately, we engage in that discussion when there's a problem, you know, and it's a reactive discussion that I don't think is, a lot of times emotions are involved and you know, people have that going on and it clouds the issue. I don't know, they have in different places, they have things called citizens police academies and things like that, which are designed to engage the public and kind of educate them as to procedure and things like that. Unfortunately, we're reactive in this area where it would be better if we were proactive in some way.
There are a lot of, I just actually went to a training last week where they were talking about the Citizens Police Academy, and there are a lot of areas that do it. It's just a matter of, you know, a lot of times they'll run it, it's like a 6-week program or something like that, where I just don't know if we'd have the resources in our area to be able to do something like that.
Just from my experience, you know, in my role and with my staff, they would get so frustrated with law enforcement. I mean, you guys know this, law enforcement knows this, because it's like, you're not doing enough for the victim. You're not helping enough. You're not giving the information that we need. You're not making the arrest. You're not. And it took me a long time to realize, wow, like we have to educate my staff about what is happening. You know, why, what is law enforcement's role and what are they doing? It doesn't mean they don't believe the victim. It doesn't mean they're not working the case, but it's, you know, procedural. And then also so that they can, you know, relay that information in a healthy way to their clients, because they were getting that from them as well. So I just think that would probably be, you know, beneficial all around.
Well, one of the things that we did to address that, as you remember, Heather, is we started from an advocate perspective, we started engaging law enforcement in their initial training. And when I would give that block on the training, I would start off with the title of this instruction is Why You Think I'm a Jerk When I Might Not Be. And you know, because there are very different perspectives and different you know, priorities, you know, when it comes to law enforcement, social work, and therapy, and all those things, even though we're all working toward the same goal. And we were as guilty of it as anybody else. You know, why is this advocate always on me about this, that, or the other thing? And if you sit down and you talk to somebody about it and say why, and you get the answer to that why question, then you can go back and say, okay, well, I can see where they're coming from. We don't always have to agree, but at least we can understand where the other entity is getting their information, or where they're coming from.
One of the things that the Human Rights Commission did, they were able to partner with Sean over like maybe 3 incidences, and they partnered with Sean during the complaint process, and they had robust and healthy conversations about perception, basically. But that started a solid relationship. So, and I honestly don't know how I feel about a citizens review board. Personally, I don't know. I tend to err to the side of you need trained people, because I wouldn't want somebody that wasn't trained to assessing me either. I feel I'm right there with you, Fred. But during that complaint time, and it just seemed to have a really positive impact on the relationship between the Human Rights Commission and Sean. It was really good. But then COVID happened, and then
I'm just curious. Is there another way to introduce transparency into the complaint process? I agree. I wouldn't want to handicap our police with a citizen review board. I see his points. They're well taken. But is there, I mean, if we think outside the box or so, is there a way? If you look at the complaint process right now, it's pretty much a closed process. It's pretty much between the shift supervisor or the patrol supervisor, the chief. It's all pretty much within the department. Is there any way we could, even if they had no jurisdiction or say in it, just a qualified observer that could be part of the process? And I'm asking for input, what especially our law enforcement people think of something. Is there something that might be acceptable that, could contribute to the public trust and in that without necessarily introducing something that could actually hurt the police? Any thoughts, Fred or Kyle? Or
I'll take this if you don't mind, Fred.
Go ahead.
Because I agree with Fred on mostly everything else he was talking about, because I think certain things, but with this, when you talk about like the internal process of that, I mean, we'd be kind of bound a little bit because of a union contract as well, would kind of restrict like some of that to make some of that maybe be more transparent. I understand where you're going with this, John, but there may be some stuff that are outside that confines. What we also have to look at is the chief and the deputy chief, and at least in our agency, are no longer part of our union. So kind of you get a little bit of a separation there, because they're more or less looking for the city's best interest, where they may not be falling where the union body itself would be looking more for the officers. So I don't know if that helps a little bit on that part of it. I'm always open to something else as well.
I understand it's a very difficult thing. And like I say, the last thing I want to do is handicap or punish our police.
Well, one of the things that was asked in both of the surveys that got put out was about having more transparency for founded complaints of misconduct, and I don't know that we've made any decision with regard to that yet, and I think that actually the governor may have made that decision for us with regard to misconduct, and because it used to all be shielded, and that's probably not the appropriate answer, because why us and nobody else, and I get that argument. I think that that where we have the issue or the friction is the complaints that come in that have no foundation, that are completely, sometimes you get a complaint and the police officer that they're complaining about wasn't even there, those kind of things.
No merit whatsoever.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a black eye for the officer. But now if you have a legitimate founded complaint that there's some kind of discipline for, we do have the issue of some union issues and different things like that. But I don't think that that's completely outside of something that could be done from a transparency. And I think that might help with the public, the general public, knowing that something happens. There was a complaint made, there was a legitimate investigation done. This person, whoever they are, was found to have been negligent in some fashion, and there was a consequence. And I think that a lot of times people feel like, well, the police department or the sheriff's department takes complaints about their staff, they investigate them internally, nothing ever happens. And that's a lot of times because we're not able to say whether anything ever happened or not. But right. I think that there is some discussion being had. I mean, there has to be, because it was included in both surveys, is to maybe having some transparency with regard to founded complaints of misconduct.
Okay, does anybody else have any more input on community input, complaint process, anything like that? I think we did great today. We actually got through all of the items on the agenda. I think everybody had an opportunity. We discussed them at length, and we didn't have to stop on any particular item and move on. So I think it was really great to have the police officers here and the sheriff's office here to really give us some context for this discussion, and the community members. We want to thank you so much for your time today. Procedurally, Jeff Dygert and I were taking notes during the whole meeting. We're going to try to compare our notes and pull them together, and those will be distributed to everybody in the group. And I don't know procedurally whether or not they'll be put up for all the groups or whatever. I do know that you will all get them. And that'll probably happen in the next day or so. We do have another meeting scheduled for December 8th. It's a follow-up meeting. I think this 3 o'clock time seemed to work, at least today, for everybody that's here. And I think that Officer Platt, I think, distributed, I believe, the Zoom meeting notice, and we'll probably do that again, or somebody from the Sheriff's Department or the Police Department will do that. So 3 p.m. on December 8th is our next official meeting. I want to thank you all for your time. I know that some people, I think Jeff might have had to leave. He's probably in the council meeting at this moment. Does anybody else have anything to add for right now?
I should have already sent everybody out the invites. I hope everybody received them.
Well, maybe I'm just the only one that didn't look at his email. Okay.
Some of them I sent out back to back, so it's possible that it's like hidden. With that's happened with a couple of people that had to call me just to log in, so that might be an issue.
Okay. I remain available, as does Jeff, if there's any questions on logistics or timing or anything that people feel that they want us to specifically bring up or address. If not, then we will be hard at work gathering up our notes and getting them out to all of you. I want to thank you all for your time, your expertise, and your commitment to the process and helping us make a better community and a better policing environment for everybody. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a safe one.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Welcome. Have a good Thanksgiving.